Welcome back to Kilmeade and Friends. And Joan Lunden is in studio, and she is going to be talking about everything she's doing now. But first things first, Joan, by trade, you are a journalist.
Oh, yeah.
And you love the news.
I'm a news junkie. Absolutely a news junkie, admittedly.
And what's happening in the Middle East is historic. We're going to remember this for forever. Anybody that's going to look at this region will study this time. We still haven't thoroughly figured it out. But Jonathan Hunt isn't waiting for the analysts. He isn't waiting for the historians. He is now on the border of Tunisia in Libya, and right at that area in which we see a ton of people around you. Jonathan, you're a chief Fox correspondent, of course, for Fox Report in Studio B. Jonathan, welcome back.
Hey, Brian, very good to be with you and with Joan this morning.
Yeah, so Jonathan, as you look around, when you landed yesterday or the day before, what did you expect to see? What have you assessed now that you've been there?
Well, Brian, when we first got to the border, which was actually last Thursday, the flood of refugees was already underway. But I tell you, over the last few days, Brian, it has become an extraordinary scene here. We're told that some 60,000 refugees have come across the Tunisian-Libyan border in just the last 5 days alone. And, Brian, at any one time, there are 20,000 more pressed up against the gates on the Libyan side, desperate to get in here. We have been kept away from that point itself, a few hundred yards from it, up until today when my cameraman and I, Thomas Chu, managed to get down next to that border. And I tell you, Brian, I have never in my life, in all of the war zones and other parts of the world that I have visited, I have never seen anything like that desperate sea of humanity trying to get in here. It really is an extraordinary scene, Brian.
Well, last night, Muammar Gaddafi really painted in an interview with Christian Amanpour that it really was a smaller faction of the population that was uprising against him. He really kind of painted a picture that it was al-Qaeda, and that the majority of the population was really still in support of him. And, of course, how much we get involved as the U.S. depends on, how much of the population really is trying to get him out. Or is he just a 40-year enemy of ours? What are you finding on the ground?
Well, I think, Joan, the reality is that Muammar Gaddafi is completely disconnected from reality. Whether he is holed up in his various palaces in Tripoli and is not receiving the true reports of what is going on in the ground, or if he just chooses to ignore reality. Clearly, he's increasingly deranged, increasingly isolated. Certainly, a large percentage of the population has risen up against him. They would not have taken control of the entire eastern half of the country had that not been the case. They would not now be in control of the city centers of a couple of the key cities, Misrata and Zawiya in the west, if that was not the case. But the thing is, Colonel Gaddafi clearly determined, whatever is going on in his head, the one thing we do know for sure is he is determined to fight to the end. He is not going to give up. And frankly, Joan, when you see some units of the army, the best trained units of the army, remaining loyal to him, the imported mercenaries from other African nations remaining loyal to him, the militias remaining loyal to him, there is every chance that he could hang on for weeks, if not months. And certainly he seems to have no qualms at all about plunging Libya into outright civil war. So I do not see this ending quickly, certainly not within a matter of days, Joan.
Well, that's fascinating stuff, because there is a call for the U.S. to do more, for Western nations to do more. Is there a sense that we're not doing enough amongst the people, or are these a bunch of people just fighting to stay alive?
No, that's a very well put, Brian. There are a lot of these people that are just fighting to stay alive, fighting to get out of there, in the case of those flocking across this border here, fighting to stay alive in terms of the anti-Gaddafi protesters in the cities across Libya. I do not hear anything from anybody coming across this border about the U.S. needing to do more. I think this is a situation that we've seen in many of these countries in the Middle East that have experienced these kind of revolutionary movements. They want change, but they do not want it brought about by any outside force, be that the United States, be that the international community in any way, shape, or form. They want to determine their own destiny. And this is a difficulty that not just President Obama, but Western leaders everywhere are faced with. Interfere too much, and there could be a backlash. Interfere not enough, and you face criticism as well. So it's a very fine line the international community is treading right now. Very difficult to do it, but the bottom line is these are people, these are nations that want to determine their own future. No, I have not heard anybody call for any sort of military intervention from the outside world. The one thing you do hear, Brian, from some people is that we need a no-fly zone enforced so that Colonel Gaddafi cannot use his air force to bomb the anti-Gaddafi protesters, because that clearly gives him a great power. That's the only thing I've heard in terms of intervention from the international community, though.
Have you seen proof of him using his air power? Because he denies he's doing it.
Yeah, no, we have not seen proof, and frankly, Brian, nobody has seen proof. We hear reports from the anti-Gaddafi forces that bombing runs have been made. We did hear one admission from Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam, that indeed a bombing raid had been made, but he said it was purely against an ammunition dump in the east. So they have admitted that those planes have been up. They have denied that they're being used against civilian targets. The protesters, the anti-Gaddafi protesters, say otherwise. This is one of those cases where we simply cannot get enough eyes and ears on the ground to report ourselves in any level of security. So we have to rely on those eyewitness reports, and it's a simple case of take your pick. Do you believe Gaddafi's people, or do you believe the anti-Gaddafi protesters?
Air power aside, what about on the ground? Do you see the Gaddafi forces going after the people, or are they in fear of that all the time?
No, they are certainly, the anti-Gaddafi protesters are always in fear of being attacked. And yes, from all the eyewitness reports we're getting, and some of the cell phone and video camera video that is being smuggled out of there, Joan, the anti-Gaddafi forces have massed. Where they are obviously holding on to Tripoli, they have, the pro-Gaddafi forces have control of Tripoli. The anti-Gaddafi forces have taken control of the center of a couple of cities in the west, and it is the west now that is critical to this. The east is gone. It is controlled by the anti-Gaddafi forces. The battle is in those western cities. Now, what you see is the anti-Gaddafi forces in the center of those cities, ringing those cities and roaming the roads between the cities, is the Libyan army, the mercenaries, the militias. Right. So this is still very much a battle for control. It could easily tip one way or another. And as I say, I believe that it is increasingly shaping up to be a long fight.
Wow, and that's interesting because his sons, like Saddam's sons, are leading the charge out in the field. Jonathan Hunt, stay safe. We'd love to check in with you again later in the week. Is that okay?
Please do, Brian. Love to be with you anytime.
All right, from the Tunisian-Libyan border, Jonathan Hunt. Thanks. So, John, a lot of breaking news. I mean, it's a lot different. When you saw the mass defections from the diplomats around the world, we thought that his days were numbered, but perhaps they're not.
Well, I mean, has had this strength in that area for, 40 years. I don't know if it's going to be quite that easy to get him out. Right,
but Joan, it's not going to be easy for you to get out. You're not getting out yet. When we come back, we talk about what you're doing now and some exciting things you have on the map, along with some things happening in entertainment and news I know you want to weigh in on. Joan Lunden's here, KilmeadeandFriends.com. Follow us online. Back in a moment.